What's going on, Packer fans? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. Happy Victory Monday. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. My guest, the one and only Alex Strouf. You can follow him on Twitter at Alex_Strouf. Packers pick up a 14-12 win. Alex, how the heck are you feeling after that victory?
I'm feeling really good, Andy, right? Like I told you before we started recording, I always feel good after a win, even though it was a gritty win, even though the offense kind of disappeared in the second half. I feel good regardless. A win's a win. I feel a lot better about the Green Bay Packers after this game than I did before this game. And I think that's my big takeaway.
So let me start by saying I reserve the right to change my mind after I watch the all 22, because that's always the key indicator and how I really feel after a game. But obviously I had the opportunity to watch the game live, had the opportunity to rewatch the game. I freaking loved this performance from the Green Bay Packers. Like I said after the Bears game, I wasn't that impressed with the Bears game win. I thought they played C+, B- at best football. I thought it was okay. I didn't think they played, from a process standpoint, well against Minnesota. I love how this team played. I love how they responded to adversity. I love how they went down in the heat of Tampa, played a defensive struggle. And I think there are so many positive takeaways from this game. I think offensively, this game looks a lot different if it's not for the Aaron Jones fumble and if it's not for probably what was a really brutal, running into the punter penalty that shouldn't have been called, where Green Bay gets the ball at the 33-yard line, probably at minimum gets 3 points on that drive, probably gets 7 on the Aaron Jones fumble. And now all of a sudden you're talking about a 24-point performance for this offense. Still not ideal, but against a very good number one defense in Tampa Bay, number one scoring defense coming into this game. I think there would have been a lot more, positivity coming off of that. And I think if you look at the process in this game, yes, they fell apart in the second half offensively. Yes, they still need to learn how to play a little bit more run-oriented football. I'll touch base on more on that in just a moment. But I thought we got a really strong performance from Romeo Doubs, which is a building block moving forward. You got David Bakhtiari back. Elton Jenkins settled in. This offensive line is starting to gel together a little bit more. And I think that's only going to continue to get better as time goes on. Defense was phenomenal. Yes, the Buccaneers, some banged up wide receivers. I get that. But the Packers missed Jaire Alexander basically the entire of the game, still respond really well on defense. The special teams look competent. To me, they showed me what a finished product looked like. This is far from a finished product, far from a finished product, but they showed me signs of what that could look like in a big game atmosphere on the road. And I am super excited about what I saw in this game.
I'm totally with you, right? You hit all 3 Ds right there, right? Like in order, it's defense, Doubs, David. Those were the big notes today, right? Obviously, you mentioned it. The defense was terrific. Everything that they were hyped up to be the last few months, I feel like they lived up to in this game. And Aaron Rodgers put it best in his post-game press conference. If we hold teams to 12 points, we're going to win every game we play in when that happens. Yeah. Romeo Doubs, you brushed over it. What was it? 8 catches on 8 targets, I think, Andy. Like that's really good for a rookie. And I heard as well in Aaron Rodgers' post-game press conference, it's the most catches by a rookie thrown to by Aaron Rodgers since 2018. So pretty darn good stat right there. So Romeo Doubs off to a good start. He was super impressive to me, obviously, without Christian Watson as well as Sammy Watkins now for the next 4 weeks at least. So impressed with him. And David Bakhtiari. I mean, we have spent almost 2 years, Andy, speculating and whining and wondering when he'd be back on the field. You got to feel so happy for him because, obviously if we're complaining how much the dude is going through. So just feel for him. So happy to see him back on the field. And he looked good when he was in there. He looked like maybe not 100%, but he looked really good.
Let's start with that. I was going to, kind of go over that a little bit later, but there's no reason to sugarcoat it. Yes, the win is huge in this game. There's no 2 ways around it. Picking up a win in Tampa, huge NFC win, moving to 2-1 with pretty easy slate of games coming up over the next month. Doesn't necessarily mean a lot, but it's definitely some winnable games. That's a great, story. And we're certainly going to talk a lot about the Packers beating the Buccaneers, but my goodness, just to see David Bakhtiari out there on the field, blocking his butt off, looking like David Bakhtiari. And, they ran behind him on that opening drive, the celebration with Aaron Rodgers and the pure joy on his face. What what an amazing moment for him to fight back the way that he did, to get to this point where he's back playing, was able to finish the game. I know he played every other series, but like was able to get through the fourth quarter still playing. We'll see what this week brings and how his body responds to that. But my goodness, was it awesome to see him out there.
Yeah, I'm curious from your perspective, Andy. Did you see a big difference between him and Yash? Like the rotating series thing was odd. I understand he was on a snap count, but he got through the end of the game, and I didn't see, at least my one time watching the game so far, like I didn't see any big disparity when they swapped out.
No, and I think that's honestly a bigger compliment to Yash than it is a negative on David Bakhtiari in this game. Sure. And I think it really goes to show how far Yash has come over the last few seasons, from a flyer undrafted free agent to basically a redshirt first season, back of the roster second season, and then last year getting starts, and now this year I'm really going out and performing on a weekly basis like a starting offensive tackle. Like I said, I'll have to go back and watch the All-22 to see how both of these guys performed overall. But like just as we saw last week with Elton Jenkins, and certainly some rust a week ago from him, there's going to be some of that from Bakhtiari. But to answer your question, at first glance and second glance, I didn't notice a huge difference between Bakhtiari and Yash when they were both out there. That said, it was an interesting decision to have both of them sort of rotate series. So I get it and I don't get it. So let's just say Bakhtiari's on a pitch count, right? Or, which he clearly was. So probably, 30 to 40 snaps maybe at most. And I know Matt LaFleur said a couple of things. He said, A, Bakhtiari hated the idea. And he said, B, like it's 88 degrees. It's his first game back basically in 2 years, to go, 0 to 100 and all of a sudden have him go from not playing for 2 years to have him playing, maybe 70 snaps in the 90-degree weather. They didn't think was the best idea, which I totally get and totally understand. So then the question becomes of like, okay, if he's going to play 30, let's just say 35 snaps in this game, how would you like to divvy up those 35 snaps? Do you want him to play all 35 at once and then say, all right, you're out? Do you want him to, do you want to play the game first and see how things are going? And then if it's garbage time one way or the other, you put him in for the end of the game. Like they had a decision to make there. And I think, one of the things this would have allowed is, let's say you go to overtime, right? And let's say during the course of the game, David Bakhtiari was playing phenomenal in the game and Yash Nyman was struggling mightily in the game. Let's just say that's what was happening. Sure. I think this left open the possibility that you get the ball in overtime, game is on the line, and you have the ability to put David Bakhtiari out there on the field and make sure that you can put your best offensive line out there in crunch time. I think they were opening themselves up to that possibility. Now, that being said, I also don't know how I really feel about like letting a guy get warmed up and go out there and play a series and then sort of sit still and not do anything for a period of time, sure, and then go out there and get it warmed up again and then not like that. Seems to me like there could be maybe some, concern as to how they go about that. But long story short, doesn't really matter. They got the win. They got through the game. Bakhtiari is able to work some of that rust off. He gets through the game. There's very few L's that Green Bay is going to take in this game. It was awesome to see him out there.
No, totally. And it's going to sound really weird saying this, but the fact they couldn't convert a third down helped, I think, the flow of things with the offensive line swap, right? It was less time that David Bakhtiari had to spend on the sideline. So sure. As weird as it is, what was it? They went 0-8, I think, or 1 of 9 in the second half. Yeah. On third down conversions, which is not ideal. But like you said, not a lot of L's to take away from this game. That's probably the biggest one. So a win's a win. I'm happy with it.
Yeah, it was crazy because as this game started, for anyone that's been listening, of what I thought this game was going to be, I'm like, this is going to be a, drag it out brawl between two defensive juggernauts.
And it was.
I thought it was going to be low scoring. I said, take the under. I said, I thought Tampa Bay was going to win in a low scoring game. And the Packers come out and score 14. Like the first 3 drives is like 14-13 Packers. And I'm like, man, I look like an absolute idiot. This is like we've got 17 points on the first 3 drives. There's no defense being played whatsoever. The Packers are up big. I'm like, but like it sort of, regressed back to this punch them out, tough football game, 14-12. I think my final prediction was 17-13. So it was right in that realm. And thankfully I get the best of both worlds where like I was in the right scheme of things, just had the wrong team, which I would so much rather be wrong and see the Packers win than the other way around. So ended up again, sort of being the best of both worlds there, but excited about, like I said, about this performance. This really, to me, came down to 2 drives. Both teams got 2 drives. And what did they do in those 2 drives? So on the defensive side of things, First of all, overall, love this performance. 59 plays, 285 yards, 12 points allowed, 2 turnovers. As you mentioned, they allow 12 points. They're going to win almost every single time. But here were the Buccaneers' first and final drives of the game. So those 2 drives just specifically, first and final. 23 plays, 137 yards, 9 points, just in those 2 drives. Wow. Their 10 other drives, 38 plays, 136 yards, so 1 less yard, and 3 points. So the Buccaneers basically got 2 drives the entire game, and they got 9 points off of it. The Packers, their first 2 drives, 22 plays, 145 yards, 14 points. Mm-hmm. Their next 10 drives, 39 plays, 149 yards, only 4
no kidding,
and 0 points. So the Packers opening 2 drives, they got 14 points. The Buccaneers first and final drive, they got 9 points. Bucs also got the short field and kind of got 3 points off of a turnover on that drive. But basically this came down to both teams having 2 really good offensive drives. The Packers did have the fumble by Aaron Jones as well. That kind of aborted that drive. But overall, 2 drives where they scored points. The Packers got 14 out of it. The Buccaneers got 9. And that really ultimately ended up being the difference in this game.
That is a heck of a stat, Paul. That's why you're the best, Andy. But I don't know what to make of it, right? Like, what do you make of the Packers offense only being able to score in the first quarter? Like, is that concerning? Like, like I said, a win's a win. You're happy with it. You're on to next week. But it's just a little nerve-wracking that I mentioned the 0 of 8 stat in the second half that they were at one point. They didn't score any points in the second half. The defense saves the day today, right? We haven't mentioned yet, Andy, Devondre Campbell, the tip ball on the 2-point conversion. Yeah. Phenomenal read, phenomenal play by Jaire there. The guy's an all-pro for a reason. He proved it on that play. But I would like to see points in the second half. That's all I'll leave it at.
Yeah, and here's the thing, right? I don't think this was an issue of like they let their foot off the gas. I didn't see it that way at all. I think this is a transition for Aaron Rodgers, for Matt LaFleur, for the fans, for everyone that's sort of, obviously watching this Green Bay Packer team this year. Mm-hmm. This is a new team. This is not your juggernaut, 5 wide receivers with Greg Jennings, Jermichael Finley, Jordy Nelson, Donald Driver, etc. This is not the best wide receiver in football-led team with Devontae Adams getting 20 targets a game. This is not that version of this team. This is a defensive first team that needs to get Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon involved and have a ball control offense and not worry so much about the points. Now, that does not absolve a team getting 0 points in the second half of a game. That certainly doesn't. They need to be better in those situations. But this is going to be a transition. And like I said, what I'm buoyed by is the fact that we saw in the first half that when they had the right game plan and they were executing the way that they are capable of executing, this team could put up points and go right down the field against what I think is arguably the best defense in football in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I thought all the way, like you almost have to expectation set going into a game, right? If I told you that this defense for the Buccaneers was as good as they were, and I think they are, I don't think that's a fraud. I think they're a legitimately phenomenal defense. Like, what would have been a good outcome in this game? If you would have told me like they got between 21 to 24 points in this game against a really tough Buccaneers defense, I'd have been like, okay, they did a good job. Now they didn't get there. They got 14. That's disappointing. That's not good enough. But as I mentioned earlier, if Jones doesn't fumble at the goal line, and if, probably had it not been for a brutal special teams call, which to be fair, that's really defense and special teams points, not necessarily offensive points, but you get to 24. And like I said, I don't think it's that big of an issue. And I look at the overall process. I thought the process in the first half was really good and they got points off of it. I think in the second half, what I was a little bit disappointed in is sort of abandoning the run and not having more success in the run. I think that's really what caused the issues in the second half, because I think one of the things, again, that they're just going to have to learn as they're transitioning here is even sometimes when the run isn't working, they're going to have to stay a bit more patient. And more importantly, you want that clock to keep running. This is your defense's game. Yeah. It's not Aaron Rodgers and 5 wides that can, obliterate you in any given moment. This is a defensive football team that can win games with their defense. Bleed that clock as much as you possibly can. I get that you still want to put up points. I get that you want to go for the Wayne Larrivee dagger, but like at the end of the day, this is a little bit of a different philosophy and team than they've had in the past. And I think there's going to be a bit of transition as the offense learns how to play that style, and B, is just kind of the team as a whole sort of readjusts and level sets expectations a little bit differently.
I think that's a really good point. And, looking at it, it seemed like the wind may have got taken out of the rushing sails after that Jones fumble, as you mentioned. I would have liked to see them pound the rock more as well. I think everybody from their couch was tweeting that during the game, right? Like, run the damn ball more, huh? And we didn't see as much as we would have liked, but still, it was fine. And I think obviously that's what led to a lot of those 3 and outs. But looking early on in the game, when you talk about the transition period and obviously the new style and the innovation we're going to have to see from this offense, it was working in those scoring drives, those first 2 drives, right? Randall Cobb getting involved. We saw a bit of Robert Tonyan involvement today, which was good to see him back in the mix. And obviously we mentioned Romeo Doubs in the huge game he had, including the touchdown early. The first 2 drives, that offense was moving as slick as they did with Devontae, right? I mean, that was a potent surgical offensive performance early on, and they got away from that. But I think you got to give credit to the Buccaneers defense, as you have, Andy, because they really are one of the best in the league. But so is Green Bay's, and today was a really good performance to prove all that offseason hype that they were receiving. It was a little reminiscent, Andy, and tell me if I'm crazy on this. It was a little reminiscent of that San Francisco playoff game, right? Like just grinding it out defensively, limiting big plays, limiting their key players. And by the end of the game, you allow a big drive, probably mainly because you're exhausted, right? Like the defense spent a lot of time in the field tonight, and they looked really good. And obviously, as I mentioned, Devondre Campbell coming up huge on the 2-point conversion attempt. And that was your Wayne Larrivee dagger there, Andy, your aforementioned dagger. So, it was an overall, like I keep saying, a win's a win. I'm not complaining. I'm just confused what happened from surgical. The good defense steps up, but so did Green Bay. So overall, it was a gritty game, man. One of the grittier Green Bay games I remember in recent memory.
And a lot of times more recently, I think one of the reasons that I'm excited about that is that, Green Bay sometimes doesn't come out on the top in those gritty games. No. Sometimes those are the ones that they struggle with. And I thought they showed a lot of character in pulling out a win, defense getting the stop when they needed to. I think for a lot of people, it felt inevitable. Tom Brady drives down the field, gets a touchdown, they get the 2-point conversion, and here we go. Buckle up, because we've seen that story before. The Tom Brady storybook somehow always finds a way to win at the end. You let him hang around and he'll make you pay for it. Yeah. Not today. Devondre Campbell broke up the pass. They get off the field. They get the win 14-12. A couple of things I want to touch base on really quick that you just mentioned. The first is that, we just talked about us wanting to see them run the football more, right? It is such a double-edged sword for a play caller, because you look at the numbers in this game, 24 carries, 66 yards, 10 yards was your long with a 2.8 yards per carry. So the philosophical approach in today's NFL in a lot of those situations and scenarios is to say, don't run it. Like, why are you giving away downs? Yeah. Like, if you just line up to hand the ball off and run into Vita Vea every play, you're not doing your job as a play caller. So you better change things up and maybe try to get some outside wide receiver stuff, or let Aaron and the other thing too, sometimes is, as a play caller, you keep handing to Jones and Dillon and letting them run into a wall. Guess what happens when you lose that game? Everyone questions, you have the 4-time MVP at quarterback. He's back-to-back MVP the last 2 years. And you didn't put the ball in his hands to go win in Tampa Bay in great conditions, to go out and let him see if he can win the game. And then you get questioned in that regards as well. So I would have liked to see them run the ball a little bit more. More importantly, I would have liked to see them run the ball more effectively. I think that was honestly the difference in the first half, is we saw them run the ball effectively in the first half, and it set everything else up. In the second half, they couldn't get the run going at all, and everything sort of collapsed underneath it. So always tough for a play caller in that scenario. And then I do want to discuss that final drive defense as well, because again, it seemed inevitable. Tom Brady's going to go down and score a touchdown and get the 2-point conversion and go from there. I know that at first glance, it really looks like they're playing, soft defense. I think a couple of those were actually just blown coverages and miscommunications more than it was soft defense, because there are a couple plays Leonard Fournette was wide open. Greg Olsen did a great job of sort of explaining what happened on one of those. But I do think it was a little bit more blown coverage, but they did play awfully soft at the beginning of that drive. One of the things that I really disliked about that is, I get that you want to make them go the length of the field and you want that clock to tick and put a little bit more pressure. But one of the things that I almost would have liked differently is, I almost want to see them play super aggressive to open that drive, because you almost have in that situation a little bit of house money. And what I mean by that is, let's say they get a huge play and they score a touchdown, right? and like you were aggressive to begin the drive and you allowed an explosive player, an explosive touchdown, you still have an opportunity to hold them off the 2-point conversion. And if you get the ball back, you're basically going to win the game. And two, if they get the 2-point conversion, now you've given Aaron Rodgers a 2-minute drill to go down and win the game, knowing that you're going to get the last possession of the game. So I know that it worked out and they were able to, get all the clock run down and that it got down to the 2-point conversion and they were able to stop it. But in that situation, I almost like the reverse of not playing soft and having the clock tick. I almost would have liked to have seen them, like I said, like play aggressive. Maybe they can get a takeaway. Maybe they can get a sack. Maybe they can get off the field there. And even if they don't, even if they get an explosive play touchdown, you're not necessarily in a bad spot. So just an interesting way that they played it. Ultimately, it worked, so I'm not going to complain too much.
Yeah, no, I agree. Ultimately, it worked, right? You hate to see the big chunk play after chunk play after chunk play that we saw leading into the 2-minute warning. Another chunk play, and then I think it was an incompletion. One more, medium pass, and then Fournette ran it in. But I don't know. I or rather got it to the goal line, and then Russell Gage had that incredible catch, which maybe we should acknowledge. I mean, that was a heck of a catch by Russell Gage for that touchdown. But they stepped up when it counted. Devondre Campbell swooped in. I mean, that was one of those plays, though, Andy, where I'm like standing on my feet, hands on the knees, like, oh my God, what's going to happen here? What's going to happen here? Are we going to go to overtime? I really didn't want to go to overtime. Glad we didn't, because I have onside kick PTSD. I have overtime PTSD. I just wanted to get out of there in 4 quarters like they did. So
yeah, and they certainly did. And I mean, the Devondre play is just such a great example. Like, I know that the NFL combine and hand measurements and everything like just sort of gets a little bit ridiculous in the off season. There's a reason why you want a 6'3", 200 and whatever pound, 4'4" or 4'5", 40, whatever he is, inside linebacker in the middle of your defense, because that size makes it really hard to get up and down over an inside linebacker, especially when you're playing a ton of zone defense. And that speed, it matters as well. And the speed, you could notice it all day on defense, but specifically on that last play, they're trying to do like kind of a flood concept, right? It looked like, and that whole defense, Darnell Savage is speeding over to that side of the field. Devondre Campbell gets over, and again, his size, really helped break up that play. Like, that stuff ends up mattering in tight contested situations. And that's why all that time, effort, and energy goes into all of that scouting and measurements and everything else. And I know he wasn't a Packer draft pick, but man, he has been a special player for Green Bay, and kudos to him for coming up with that big play.
Yeah, you're spot on. And Aaron Rodgers mentioned it in his post-game availability, pretty much just saying, look, that's a guy that a year and a half ago teams didn't even want. And now look where he's been, right? He was a first-team All-Pro a year ago. He's making the biggest play, and debatably, I mean, not even debatably, their biggest game here in the early part of the season. So kudos indeed. Kudos indeed. You nailed it.
Speaking of players that nobody even wanted,
we've
got to talk about Keyshawn Nixon, because what a performance from him. I just want to let everyone know Keyshawn Nixon's contract here for a second. 1 year, $965,000. Wow. Do you want to take a gander at how much of that is guaranteed, Alex?
I have no idea, Andy. Tell me.
None.
Oh, there you
Absolutely go. None. A zero guarantee contract.
Really?
He is a 3-year corner for the Raiders. He is 25 years old. I know he was originally an undrafted player, but has a ton of special teams experience. Actually got some time playing slot snaps in the game last year for the Raiders. And I know he was probably brought in as like hey, we think he knows the special teams for Rich Bisaccia and can help us in that regards. He played a phenomenal football game on defense and on special teams, had the pass breakup in the end zone, had the forced fumble on the play, had the punt down at the 1 yard line where he caught it and kept his feet out, out of the end zone, which I don't think any Packer gunner has been able to do in like the 38 years I've been alive. It's just unbelievable that you get this guy on a zero guaranteed deal, 1 year, under $1 million. Like, he was just the Raiders had no interest in bringing him back. No other NFL team had any interest in, saying like, hey, we're going to guarantee at least $50K of your deal to come sign with us. Packers basically get him at a minimum, and just an absolute steal. He came in for Jaire and played just a phenomenal game all the way around.
Yeah, he popped off the page almost immediately. You mentioned the pass breakup and the forced fumble, and you were like, oh, holy smokes, this kid can play. It was almost reminiscent of a game a year ago where kind of Rasul Douglas had his breakout moment, right? And
great call.
Coming out in almost, replacing Jaire, who was hurt, stepping up in those situations and coming out of nowhere. And I think you mentioned the punt down right at the 1 yard line. That might have been the most impressive one. And, for how god awful that special teams was a year ago, there were a couple bright moments, from the special teams tonight. The Amari return obviously got wiped back with a penalty, but that play right there stuck out maybe among them all of why Keyshawn Nixon looked so good. And we knew obviously the connection with Rich Bisaccia was a big reason they brought him in. I had no idea his deal had $0 guaranteed. That is bananas.
It is. And let's just talk about Brian Gutekunst for a second, because it's not
let's do that.
Yeah, it's easy it should be easy as a GM if you've got a bunch of money to spend and you can go out in one free agency and get Preston Smith, Zadarius Smith, Adrian Amos, and Billy Turner, right? Like that's the easy part of being a GM. They didn't spend money on free agents for forever, so they had a bunch of money to go out and spend. And it was like, Brian Gutekunst took over for Ted Thompson, is like, oh, he saved a bunch of money. I get to be the one to go spend it, and that's the easy part, right? The hard part is once you've spent said money and keeping your own guys and going out and getting other guys, and now you've got to go find bargain deals on players that can help you to try to help you win football games. Well, guess what? In this game, Jerron Reed splits a double team and helps force a sack. Not a huge contract for him, has a big impact in this game. Keyshawn Nixon, we just talked about. He finds Rudy Ford right before the season starts, a absolute special teams demon that they haven't had in just about you can talk about Jeff Janis or Jarrett Bush. Rudy Ford is a step above either of those guys. He is the best special teams player that I can remember in Green Bay. Don Beebe maybe has a little bit of a spot there, but man, he has been phenomenal to start the season. Dallin Levitt, a guy that you find that helps you on special teams. Pat O'Donnell was phenomenal in this game. How about 7 punts, which you don't really want 7 punts, but 339 yards, 0 touchbacks, 5 of them downed inside the 20-yard line, 63-yard long, and a 48.4-yard average. Phenomenal find there.
Game ball.
Seriously, just these little pickups here and there. And Sammy Watkins, of course, the big game that he had last week. I know he's on IR now, but he didn't have a ton of money to spend, but he found guys that can help this team win. And it wasn't anyone today that had 7 catches for 400 yards, whatever, or had this major performance, but a bunch of guys that helped put together a winning performance. That is a hard part. Kudos to Gutekunst and the pro scouting staff.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And this is becoming a common theme with Brian Gutekunst over the course of the last few years, right? These low risk, high reward moves that have paid off in big dividends, right? I mentioned Rasul. We've talked about Devondre Campbell. There's 2 more examples tonight, and Sammy Watkins, again, an example last week. Has there been some misses mixed in? Of course there has been, right? Was it Tavon Austin? Was that the receiver he brought in that didn't do a whole lot? That wasn't ideal, but it was a low-risk move. It didn't really matter. Who was the linebacker? Jalen Smith, I think it was, right? That they brought in for a couple weeks.
No risk,
Didn't work out. Didn't really matter. And for the ones that have worked out, they've worked out big time. And a couple examples again tonight. So that is a big hats off category for Brian Gutekunst over the course of the last couple of years.
Let's talk about another rookie that Brian Gutekunst went out and got, part of that Devontae Adams trade. Let's talk about Quay Walker, because Quay Walker is sort of how I have, kind of defined this team right now. Far from a finished product, but man, the flashes are really impressive. And him forcing that fumble, he comes up on the play and then the pass gets behind him and the receiver goes upfield. He reverses field, gets back, rallies to the football, punches the ball out, and the Packers get a huge takeaway in that scenario. This defense responded every time they were under adversity. When the Packers turned the ball over twice, the Packers were able to get it back on defense. The Keyshawn Nixon play, the Quay Walker play, when they allowed a touchdown, they were able to get the stop on the 2-point conversion. Just response after response. I'm just very, very impressed. I tweeted this out. As excited as I am about 2022 Quay Walker right now, I am already drooling over the idea of 2024 Quay Walker. When he's had a couple of seasons under his belt, that dude is going to be a freak.
Yeah, I feel like we had similar feelings about a guy like Rashawn Gary, right? Where he showed some really nice flashes in his rookie season. And then you're like, oh God, what is this guy going to look like in a few years? we got some answers. Third straight game for Rashawn Gary with the sack. He is reaching that elite category. But to your point, I was super impressed with Quay Walker again. He showed some pops in the preseason, has had some really nice plays here in the regular season, including the forced fumble tonight. So, those boys from Georgia can ball. I mean, Eric Stokes and the two he picked this year have all shown some flashes. Haven't seen a ton yet from Devontae Wyatt, but he got in there a bit tonight, as you mentioned. And I'm excited for his development as well. So, yeah, those guys from Georgia that Brian Gutekunst, as you use the term, drools over, right? Like, they can play, man. They can play. And we saw that again tonight with Quay Walker.
Yeah, very much so. I could not be more excited for what I think his progression is going to be. And he's already, paying some dividends and getting some ROI with some big plays already. Let's talk about one of the players that the GM didn't necessarily want, but the other GM did. That's Randall Cobb. How about old man Randall Cobb? 2 catches, 57 yards, not exactly blowing up the stat sheet. But, man, those 2 plays showing off a little bit of wheels for the old man Randall Cobb. Like, that was some impressive football from him. I didn't know he still had that speed in him.
I was going to say the 32-year-old still got some giddy up. I did not. I'm totally with you. When he got broken loose there, both of those plays, he had some space. Like, whoo, there's still some tread on those wheels, man. Yeah, he looks solid. And, I mean, that right there is exactly why Aaron Rodgers wanted him back in Green Bay, right? I mean, there's just a ridiculous amount of chemistry between those two. And when they can find, and I used the term chunk plays earlier, when they can find opportunities for those over the middle and he can break free, you saw 2 examples why tonight, an average of 28.5 yards a catch tonight for Randall Cobb. Not too shabby in the stat sheet.
No, not at all. I like I said, very excited about the flashes from this team. I think they're going to be just fine offensively. I think they just need to put a few of the pieces together, really find their identity. I've seen what I've need to see from some of these playmakers. I think, Christian Watson was out this game. I think he's going to be a player that's going to be able to take the top off of defenses at times. We've seen Romeo Doubs already take a step. Randall Cobb still got some wheels. Alan Lazard's making some plays. These running backs are talented. This offensive line is just getting together with Bakhtiari and Jenkins anchoring both sides for the first time. There is a lot of ceiling left for this offense that we haven't come close to seeing yet. Like I said, I'm excited after this one. However, there's always got to be a wet blanket, right? There's always got to be something. We won't talk, dwell on it too much after, a victory. And as we're celebrating a victory Monday here, as people are listening to this, but Jaire Alexander, Josh Myers, both go down with injuries in this game. Jaire has an early groin injury, does not return. Josh Myers, I don't know, was there ever an official injury designation as to what it was?
I did not see anything on him, Andy. And I know you mentioned before we started recording, you didn't see if he came back out for that final kneel down, but I did not see an official designation at all now.
Okay. So yeah, we'll have to definitely, kind of keep an eye on that as the week goes on, but overall 2, at least as we know of, 2 injuries coming out of this game. I know there were some thoughts that maybe Myers was just cramping. So hopefully that was the case. Obviously a ton of heat, and hopefully he's able to be back sooner rather than later. And then Jaire Alexander, the one thing Matt LaFleur did say was that he was smiling and all smiles and in good spirits in the locker room after the game. He didn't have any other update, doesn't know the status of the injury. So hopefully that's a bullet dodged as well. But 2 injuries that could be very costly if they are out for any period of time. And we just got to have to kind of hope for the best. Although, Keyshawn Nixon, next big thing. So if all of a sudden Jaire's out for a little bit, they've got the next guy up, I guess. So
yeah, it's just going to be the Rasul emergence of 2022. You're absolutely correct. But no, in all seriousness, obviously you're a much better football team when Jaire's in there. So hoping for the best, fingers crossed, obviously with everything that he went through last year, right? Getting injured and missing the rest of the regular season. We would not like a repeat of that. So fingers crossed.
Man, imagine I told you last year at like around this time that Eric Stokes, who was a rookie, who was just starting to play some of his first games, and you had no idea what he was going to become, struggled in training camp, and it was a total toss-up as to what he was going to become. Keyshawn Nixon, a third-year player at the time last year who was on the Raiders, who had done absolutely nothing in his career, and Rasul Douglas, who had already been cut like 3 or 4 times last season at this time and was not even a member of the Green Bay Packers. Obviously, neither was Nixon. If I told you that next year that you were going to have to go against Tom Brady in a huge NFC matchup with Eric Stokes, Keyshawn Nixon, and Rasul Douglas as your 3 primary corners in that game, I don't even know how anyone would have responded to that. But there's no way you could have possibly felt good And I'll tell you what, those three, corners, I know a lot of wide receiver injuries for the Bucs, but those three corners balled out and had a really nice game.
Totally. I mean, 12 points is what we can keep pointing back to, right? 12 points is all they got on the scoreboard tonight, and that's a Tom Brady-led offense. That's something to be damn proud of, especially so early on in the season, and with Jaire going out early in this game. I'm super happy overall with the defensive performance. Let's just hope they can stack these good games now, obviously, and we'll get in, I imagine, a little bit into next week against New England, but you're back at home. Stack good defensive performances. Limit them to what? Under 3 touchdowns. And you're pretty happy with that because Aaron Rodgers can put points on the board against any defense that is apparently not as good as Tampa Bay.
No, I go back to that Minnesota game as well. I know 23 points in a loss, and it felt ugly. Defensively, I like their process in that game. Like I said, 3 of those points were on the offense, where the offense or the turnover, Vikings actually went backwards like 5 yards and still got a field goal out of it. The defense is basically responsible for 20 in that game, 10 against Chicago, 12 against Tampa. I mean, man, you're going to win so many games if that's what your defense is able to sort of limit teams to. And as they go forward, New England, New York Giants, New York Jets, Washington Commanders, next 4 games. Those are, like you said, an opportunity to really stack some defensive success. And speaking of those New England Patriots, one thing that we'll have to absolutely keep an eye on this week, Mac Jones leaves the game injured, was not able to put any weight on his left foot, had to be carried out into the locker room after that game. So that would be a major issue, an injury for the Patriots. And again, with the Patriots coming to town, Lambeau Field this upcoming Sunday, a major injury to keep an eye on through the course of this week.
Yeah, from what I've seen, Andy, it seemed like he was in a hell of a lot of pain. So it's certainly not ideal for the New England Patriots. For those of you keeping track at home, Brian Hoyer, somehow still the backup in New England. So that would be who the Packers would have to face. Not the first time they've seen Brian Hoyer either, but nonetheless, that's just something we'll have to keep an eye on. We dealt with it this week with Mike Evans, right? Like, obviously you want to play the team's best players, but you can only play who's in front of you. So you hope for the best for Mac Jones, but if it's Brian Hoyer, you got to play Brian Hoyer. And again, your defense can't take it any easier on him, right? Just because it's a backup quarterback. You hope they even, put the foot even harder on the gas against the backup quarterback in his first start of the year.
Totally agreed. Could not have said it better myself. It's going to be a fun week coming off a big victory against Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Packers moved to 2-1 on the season. Alex, this was absolutely amazing. Thanks so much for doing this. You can follow him on Twitter at Alex_Strouf. Alex, any final thoughts today?
Yeah, Andy, I have some assistance ready to give you. I know you've got game stories to write, so I have come up with a couple of one-liners.
Okay.
Given that the National Football League has announced that Rihanna will be playing the Super Bowl halftime show this year.
Yep.
So I think you can lead it off with Mike Evans could not play for the Buccaneers because he was a rude boy. And then you could follow it up with the Packers put in that work. The defense showed they were too good for you. And if you're coming to Lambeau Field on Sunday, bring your umbrella because it might be drizzly. Thank you. There you go.
I thought you were going umbrella defense at some point where it was like a bend but no break, umbrella defense. I was waiting for it. But you worked it in another way, so I appreciate that nonetheless. Maybe don't follow him on Twitter. I'm just kidding.
Probably not.
At Alex_Strouf. You can follow me at Andy Herman NFL. Of course, you can follow the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. I'll be right back here tomorrow with an all-new episode. Also coming up this week on Tuesday, Pack-A-Day Live, 7 p.m. Central on YouTube. Do not miss it. Special guest this week, Ross Uglum and Justice Mosqueda. So should be a absolutely phenomenal show. Thanks for joining me. Always appreciate it. But until next time, and as always, go Pack, go.
Go Pack!